Good afternoon, everybody. Oh, very small group today. Only the very dedicated are here. It's good to see you. So, today we are going to look at the Devadutta Sutta, the Divine Messengers, or one of the Divine Messenger Suttas, and this one being one from the Aguttara Nikaya. And I must admit, I have a certain partiality to this particular sutta, and for reasons that I'll explain later on. And actually, it was Lynn Jackson asked about it earlier in the week, because I think I referred to it or something. So that could have got me thinking about it, so I thought it would be a nice one to do a reading from. So this is the sutta about the divine messengers, and tells you a little bit about some of the things you've always wanted to know about Buddhism, namely, how does hell work, and fire and brimstone and all that kind of stuff. We can't let the other religions get away with having all of the fire and brimstone. We've got to have a bit ourselves. Anyway, okay, moving right along. Let's read through the sutta first. Should we read the whole sutta? Yeah, let's maybe read the whole sutta. Okay. Because there are these three divine messengers. What three? Here, because someone engages in misconduct by body, speech and mind. In consequence, with the breakup of the body after death, he is reborn in the plane of misery in a bad destination in the lower world in hell. There the wardens of hell grab him by both arms and show him to King Yama, saying, "This person, your majesty, did not behave properly towards his mother and father. He did not behave properly towards ascetics and Brahmins, and he did not honor the elders of the family. May your majesty inflict due punishment on him." Then King Yama questions, interrogates, and cross-questions him about the first divine messenger. "Good man, didn't you see the first divine messenger that had appeared among human beings?" And he replies, "No, Lord, I didn't see him." And then King Yama says to him, "But good man, didn't you ever see among human beings a man or a woman, 80, 90 or 100 years of age, frail, bent like a roof bracket, crooked, wobbling as they go along, leaning on a stick, ailing, youth gone, with broken teeth, with grey and scanty hair, or bald, with wrinkled skin and blotched limbs?" And the man replies, "Yes, Lord, I have seen this." Then King Yama says to him, "Good man, doesn't it occur to you, an intelligent and mature person, I too am subject to old age. I am not exempt from old age. Let me now do good by body, speech and mind." "No, Lord, I could not. I was heedless." Then King Yama says, "Through heedlessness, good man, you failed to do good by body, speech or mind. Surely they will treat you in a way that fits your heedlessness. That bad karma of yours was not done by your mother or father, nor by your brother or sister, nor by your friends and companions, nor by your relatives and family members, nor by the deities, nor by ascetics or Brahmins. Rather, you were the one who did that bad karma, and you yourself will have to experience its result." When King Yama has questioned, interrogated and cross-examined him about the first divine messenger, he again questions, interrogates and cross-examines him about the second divine messenger. "Good man, didn't you see the second divine messenger that appeared among human beings?" And he replied, "No, Lord, I didn't see him." Then King Yama says to him, "But good man, didn't you ever see among human beings a man or a woman sick, afflicted, gravely ill, lying in his own urine and excrement, having to be lifted up by some and put down by others?" And he replies, "Yes, Lord, I have seen this." Then King Yama says to him, "Good man, didn't it occur to you as an intelligent and mature person, I too am subject to illness. I'm not exempt from illness. Now let me do good by body, speech and mind." "No, Lord, I could not. I was heedless." And King Yama says, "Through heedlessness you failed to do good. Surely they will treat you in a way that fits your heedlessness. That bad karma was not done by your mother, father, brother or sister, by anyone else. It was done by you, and you yourself will have to experience its result." And he questioned him regarding the third divine messenger. "Good man, didn't you see the third divine messenger that had appeared among human beings?" And he said, "No, Lord, I didn't see him." "But good man, didn't you ever see among human beings a man or a woman, 1 or 2 or 3 days dead, the corpse bloated, livid, and festering?" And he says, "Yes, Lord, I have seen this." King Yama says to him, "Good man, didn't it occur to you, as an intelligent and mature person, I too am subject to death. I am not exempt from death. Let me now do good by body, speech, and mind." "No, Lord, I could not. I was heedless." And King Yama says, "Through heedlessness, good man, you fail to do good by body, speech, or mind. Surely they will treat you in a way that fits your heedlessness. That bad karma of yours was not done by your mother or father, nor by your brother or sister, nor by your friends or relatives, ascetics or family members, nor by the devas, ascetics or brahmins. Rather, you were the one who did that bad karma, and you yourself will have to experience its result." When Bhikkhus, King Yama has questioned, interrogated, and cross-examined him about the third divine messenger, he falls silent. Then the wardens of hell torture him through the 5-fold transfixing. They drive a red-hot iron stake through one hand and another through the other hand. They drive a red-hot iron stake through one foot, another through the other foot, and another through the middle of his chest. There he feels painful feelings, yet he does not die as long as that bad karma is not exhausted. Next, the wardens of hell throw him down and pare him with axes, or harness him to a chariot and drive him back and forth across the ground that's blazing, burning, and glowing. Or they make him climb up and down a great mound of coals, or they turn him upside down and plunge him into a red-hot copper cauldron that is burning, blazing, and glowing. He's cooked there in a swirl of foam. And as he's being cooked there in a swirl of foam, he's swept now up, now down, and now across, feeling painful, racking, piercing feelings, yet he does not die, so long as that bad karma is not exhausted. Next, the wardens of hell throw him into the great hell. Now, bhikkhus, as to that great hell, it has 4 corners and 4 doors and is divided into separate compartments. It is surrounded by iron ramparts and shut in with an iron roof. Its floor as well is made of iron and heated till it glows with fire. The range is full 100 yojanas, which it ever covers pervasively. Once, bhikkhus, in the past, King Yama thought, those in the world who do evil deeds are punished with such diverse tortures. Oh, that I might attain the human state, that a Tathagata, the Arahat, the fully enlightened Buddha, might arise in the world, that I might attend upon that Buddha, that the Buddha might teach me the Dhamma, and that I might come to understand his Dhamma. Because I'm not repeating something that I heard from another ascetic or Brahmin, but rather I'm speaking about a matter that I've actually known, seen, and understood for myself. Though warned by the divine messengers, those people who remain heedless sorrow for a long time, having fared on to a lower realm. But those good people here, who when warned by the divine messengers, never become heedless in regard to the noble Dhamma, who, having seen the peril in clinging as the origin of birth and death, are liberated by non-clinging in the extinction of birth and death. Those happy ones have attained security. They have reached Nibbana in this very life. Having overcome all enmity and peril, they have transcended all suffering. Okay, so that's the Devadutta Sutta. So a few just bits of background. This particular sutta, the subject matter of the sutta, dealing with the hells and the punishments therein, is quite an unusual subject matter for the suttas. This is only really addressed in a few suttas. The other 2, which are well known, are the Devadutta Sutta of the Majjhima Nikaya, number 130, as well as the Balapandita Sutta, also in the Majjhima Nikaya, number 129. In addition to that, there's 1 or 2 other places in the sutta. There's one sutta in the Sutta Nipata. But these suttas also have quite a lot of parallels in the Chinese canon, and it seems like the Chinese were really into the tortures of hell. And there's about 8 or 9, something like that, parallels to this in the Chinese canon. I haven't studied those in detail. Tibetan and Sanskrit sources don't seem to have any parallels for this as such. So, number of interesting things to look at. the main thing that you're probably wondering right now is that real? Is hell really a place with burning iron floors and so on? And I'm just going to start this all by saying, I don't know, but I do know how you can find out. Is there a place of molten metal deep under the earth? Well, that's what they say the core of the earth's like. I don't know. Maybe that's where you get reborn. Anyway, some of you who've heard some of the things that I've taught over the years and read and written and so on over the years would know that one of the themes that I come back to a number of times is I think that in Buddhism and the way that we look at Buddhism these days, we avoid the subject of Buddhist mythology. If you don't think this is the case, have a look on Wikipedia. Look at the article on Christian mythology, the article on Hindu mythology, and the article on Buddhist mythology. The article on Buddhist mythology is very Buddhist. It's completely empty. It doesn't exist at all. Okay? So, or at least it didn't last time I looked. Maybe someone's made one since then. And to me, that's a symptom of the state of affairs, the amount of serious or interesting studies that have been done on Buddhist mythologies. I could probably count on one hand, and most of them I've written myself. So what's the problem here, right? The fact is that Buddhism has a very, very extensive body of mythological texts, right? Possibly more, depending how you count them, possibly more than any other religion. I mean, the Jatakas alone are the world's largest and oldest and best preserved collection of folk or mythological literature. And there's plenty of others beside that. Right? Buddhism is one of the world's greatest storytelling traditions. And this was acknowledged by, among others, Joseph Campbell, a very well-known writer on mythology, who used the life of the Buddha as one of the core tales in his book on the hero with 1,000 faces. So Buddhist mythology exists, and it's extremely extensive, and that tells us that it was very important for Buddhists down through the years. And of course the reality is, if we go to any traditional Buddhist country, you go to all the temples and you look around, then what do you see? But you see all of these stories and tales and things like that, the life of the Buddha and various other things depicted in Borobudur or in Sanchi and Amravati, back to the old Indian times, but also in modern times in the different temples and so on. And this is obviously something which was a very, very important part of Buddhism and Buddhist teachings and culture from the earliest times down to today, and yet we seem to pass over it silently. And what is going on here? Well, what's going on is, I think that in Buddhism we have a kind of, we're a bit embarrassed about mythology. We don't really like it very much because we think Buddhism is very rational, right? We think Buddhism is scientific. And then we read something like this and we think, oh, that's not very scientific, is it? And so we have basically two schools of thought within Buddhism. Basically, the traditionalists will argue that all of those stories are literally true. And they'll argue that if you think, for example, that there isn't really the image of a rabbit on the moon, then you don't have any faith in the Buddha's teachings. Okay? And then there will be others who argue the opposite extreme. They either try to ignore the mythology, or if they do look at the mythology at all, they will say, it's all just psychological. It's all just a metaphor, right? It's not real, but it's just a description of psychological states. So hell is just, feeling bad. I don't know. I felt bad, but I don't know if I've ever felt anything that's that bad as that sounds. That sounds worse than I've ever felt. But hey, maybe I just haven't felt that bad. Anyway, so we have the psychological school of thought, and I think those schools of thought are both wrong. I disagree with both of them, and I think not only are they wrong, I think they're boring. It's even worse than being wrong. I think they're boring. Reading an ancient spiritual literature and insisting that every word in it is literally true and so on and so forth is just boring. It doesn't show any imagination or any kind of understanding of how things relate to their context or anything like that. And the psychologizing of things is boring as well. All you do is you just take your own pre-existing ideas of Buddhist psychology or something, and then you just read them into a text. Anybody can do that. It's very, very easy and it's boring. So I don't like either of those approaches. And I think we should think of mythical texts as myths from the perspective of mythology, understanding what is a myth and looking at it from that way. And to me, that way of looking at things is very, very rich and very interesting and very exciting. And I think it's a very fallow field as far as Buddhism is concerned. I think it's very little been done, certainly in the academic and scholarly field. And I think there are many, many things which are quite exciting and interesting to explore. But what do I mean when I say we look at it as myth, right? Do I mean we look at it like what myth as in Mythbusters, right? Is that what I mean? It's either real or true, and you go, oh, it's busted, it's not real, therefore it's just a myth, right? Well, that's how the word myth is used in popular culture, but that's not how the word myth is used. And when we talk about mythology, what the word myth means when we talk about mythology, a bit hard to define really, but it means something like a story that has a meaning within a culture, okay? Particularly a story that has a meaning regarding matters of fundamental importance, okay? So like creation myths or myths of, like that you could think of the life of the Buddha as a myth. It's like a myth that's offering spiritual salvation and so on. So in this kind of sense, a myth, the idea of a myth is completely neutral as to the question of whether it's true or not, okay? The question of truth is an entirely different kind of question than the question of whether something, of the mythology of something. And so in that respect, we can look at the way that the life of the Buddha is presented, and we can look at the way that the life of Luke Skywalker is presented, and we can point out all these different parallels between the two and say that they're telling a similar kind of myth, okay? Even though one of them obviously is real and one is not. You can guess for yourself which one is real and which one is not out of those two. Okay, so the importance from a mythological point of view is not whether something is true or not, but it's what something means, okay? And when we talk about what something means in mythology, you don't mean what does it mean objectively, right? It's not like a scientific fact that has an objective meaning, but what does it mean to a people? And this is another very important thing about mythology. And mythology is not like a personal story, okay? So when we write stories today, we celebrate people who write personal stories. They write to their own feelings and emotions and experiences and so on and so forth. And we have novels and short stories and so on. And that kind of personal writing is very different from what we experience in mythology, okay? And mythology is not personal, it's about the experiences of a people, okay? About the beliefs, the hopes, the fears, the expectations and so on, that's shared among a group of people over a long period of time. And that common story is a very important part of creating the identity of those people, all right? It is an active process. Myth is not something which is just handed down, right? So we use that kind of idiom, is handed down through the generations. That's not really accurate, because that's suggesting that the myth is something separate from people, right? And stays the same. No, a myth is constantly recreated, yeah, among and by the people as they are forming themselves. It's each time you bring the myth to life by reading it or by speaking it aloud or by embellishing it in an oral tradition, retelling it, putting it in a new format, making a Disney movie out of it or whatever, every time you recreate it, you're helping to define what are the values, what are the things of meaning to that people, okay? So this is how a people create themselves, create their own sense of identity through a story that represents shared values, okay? So this is a way of looking at mythology. Okay, so let's have a look at this and let's consider the Divine Messenger's story in terms of mythology. Before I go on, any questions? Peter. I will do in a minute. I'll go through all the parts of the sutta, but any questions on what I've talked about so far?
Just an observation. Four corners, four doors, like an oven doesn't have four doors, but it reminds me of an oven.
probably quite similar. But I'll come to those details later. But any questions about what I've talked about so far? Because I don't want to jump the gun when I'm talking, okay? Anything else? Other questions about what we've talked about so far? No? All right. Okay, very good. Okay, so we'll come on to the story itself, these three divine messengers. Now, first thing which you should notice is that this question of the divine messengers sounds a bit familiar, doesn't it? And if you've read the life of the Buddha, you know that the life of the Buddha, this is one of the crucial events in the life of the Buddha, right, where he met, in fact, the 4 divine messengers. Here we have only 3, okay? Now, so what's going on here? Well, actually the story of the 4 divine messengers is the Buddha meeting, or the Bodhisattva meeting the 4 divine messengers is not found anywhere told of Siddhartha Gautama in any of the early suttas, right? So that's a bit challenging if you've been brought up in traditional Buddhism, and that's something which is such a basic thing, right? It's one of the most basic parts about Buddhism, that the Siddhartha goes out from the palace and then meets these 4 divine messengers. And yet, in the earliest tellings of the Buddha's life, we don't find anything like that, right? And it seems very unlikely that that actually happened to me. It is told, however, in another mythological sutta, which is the Mahapadana Sutta of the Digha Nikaya, when it's talking about one of the previous Buddhas, in fact, Vipassi, the Bodhisattva. So I suspect that the kernel of the story probably is in the sutta that we have in front of us, or something similar to that, and that from there it was adopted first into the life of Vipassi, the Bodhisattva, and then later on into the life of Siddhartha, and going into the life of Siddhartha only happened after the early period. So I suspect this passage is earlier. One of the reasons for thinking it's earlier, obviously, is because there's only 3 divine messengers. 4th divine messenger is the samana, the ascetic or the monk, and that's not mentioned here. So in a sense, the ascetic or the monk is a sign of hope, right? A sign of possibility. Oh, there could be an option. There could be a way out. Okay. So, the 3 divine messengers. Let's have a look at the first one. Okay, so the Buddha's speaking, in the voice of the sutta, the Buddha's speaking, and points out someone who does bad acts by body, speech and mind. So this way of expressing bad deeds by body, speech and mind is very characteristic of Buddhism. We do find it in other places as well. But one of the things, or one of the points here is that with the acts of karma, always remember that by coming back and expressing this, that it's pointing to, how can I put this? It's pointing to, I guess just the empirical or the everyday sense or meaning, which is what we mean by making bad karma, okay? By body, speech and mind. So it's an actual act that you do that is harmful. This is what we call bad karma. Okay, so then as a result of that, he's born in the lower realm. Okay, so notice that in Buddhist causality, as it is here, it's not meant to be a necessary thing. It doesn't mean that everybody who performs an act of bad karma gets reborn in some lower realm. It just means in this particular case, that's what happened. Okay, then the wardens of hell grab him by both arms. Now, who these wardens of hell are is a bit obscure, frankly. Actually, this question is discussed in the Milinda Panha, which, if you're interested in all of these obscure, knotty problems of interpreting the suttas and things, the Milinda Panha is a very interesting source. A dialogue between King Milinda, or King Menanda, was a Greek king, lived about 400 to 500 years after the Buddha. And this text is set as a discourse between him and a monk called Nagasena. And the king asked Nagasena all different kinds of questions trying to, sometimes it seems trying to get information out of him, but just as often trying to trap him into making some mistake or finding some contradiction in the suttas or something like that. And one of the questions he asked him was about these wardens of hell. He says, like, are these real, or how do you get, what's up with these wardens of hell? And Nagasena gives him an explanation for that, which, if I remember correctly, I think if you're I think it's like it's where bad prison guards go in their next life, something like that. But don't quote me on that. I'd have to check the Melinda. Anyway, okay. So the wardens of hell grab him by both arms and show him to King Yama, saying, "This person, Your Majesty, did not behave properly. May Your Majesty inflict due punishment on him." So they show him to King Yama. So who is King Yama? Right? Well, King Yama is basically as his role here is the judge of the dead. Yeah. So that's similar to you find deities in Western mythology and so on who form a similar role. Who is it in Greek mythology who's like the judge of the dead? Is it Pluto? Hades? Hades is... Sorry? They go to Hades, yeah. Who's the Lord? Sorry? That's right, yeah, you get on the ferry, go across the Styx and you go... Who's the name of the god down there? Maybe it's just Hades. Should know that. Anyway, okay, so this idea of the judge of the dead, and I think in the Egyptian mythology you have a similar kind of thing. They kind of weigh your good deeds and bad deeds and sort of determine where you end up, right? So this is King Yama. So he's a figure from Indian mythology, and I haven't researched the history of Yama. So, but usually you'll find with these things that they are found in the non-Buddhist mythology as well. I'm not exactly sure whether that's the case with Yama. Okay. So, the wardens of hell, and this is a very nice point, but the wardens of hell say to the king, inflict punishment on him, okay? So the wardens of hell, who presumably are not particularly smart, okay, think that the god of death's role is to punish, right? But as we see later on in the sutta, he doesn't do any punishing at all, right? He falls silent at the end of it. And this is one of the things about the sutta that I really like. At the end of it, what does it say? Through heedlessness. That's right. When he had questioned him about the third divine messenger, he falls silent. Right? So King Yama isn't the one he doesn't judge him. Right? He's supposed to be the judge of the dead. What kind of judge is that? Doesn't pronounce any punishment, right? Doesn't do anything. All he does is ask questions. He asks the person to reflect back on what he's done. Right? So this is, I think, very psychologically very subtle and very acute, isn't it? Yeah, that our actual punishment comes from when we look into our own hearts and we see what we've done. Yeah. And this is, for those of you who came to my talk on Friday, I talked a little bit about Buddhist jurisprudence and the way that we handle discipline and so on within the Sangha. Right? We have our Vinaya, and within the Sangha, within the Vinaya, there's no real concept of punishment, right? So we don't, do anything to hurt anybody or harm somebody. But the main point, if somebody's done something wrong, is that they need to confess it and they need to reflect on it and to decide to do better in the future. Right? So there's no notion of punishment as such. And this is something which is it's one of those issues which, when you try to talk about it in a like an interfaith or just a general context, is a bit difficult to talk about it, because they always use this word. What's the word they use? It'll come to me in a minute. Retributive? Is it retributive? I can't remember. It's something like that. They use a word like retributive to talk about this kind of ethical system, and it's a word which doesn't really fit the Buddhist context at all. because as the sutta makes it very clear, there's no notion of retribution or vengeance or punishment or anything like that. It's purely about cause and effect. Okay, so King Yama's coming. Now, and then King Yama says to him, "Good man, didn't you see the one man who's bent over, old, frail, bent like a roof bracket?" Right? Now, you think that's a kind of an I always thought there's a bit of an exaggeration until I actually went to India, and you see actually there are really old people who really bent over, literally bent over double, like they're walking, they were, like they're 180 degrees, more than 90 degrees bent over. They're nearly 180 degrees bent over. So, yeah, it doesn't look pleasant at all. So he's kind of questioning him, right? So, you can imagine, what is this doing in terms of storytelling? What's actually happening here, right? So think about what's actually happening in storytelling. Yama, okay, let's assume that Yama is a sort of figure in the minds of the imagination or consciousness of the people who's being listened to here, the people who are listening to the sutta. And he is becoming... you're giving like this kind of divine aura, if you like, this cosmic significance to something which is very, very ordinary and everyday. Okay, they're talking about just an ordinary sight of seeing an old person walking along, right? And it's something which we see every day, right? Or certainly in India or in ancient India, they saw that every day. It's the most ordinary, common, banal thing you could possibly see, right? And it has, with so many of these ordinary things we see every day, it has no significance. Okay, you just pass it over, right? It's just an old person. What's the big deal? Yeah. So to say that he hasn't seen it, of course, is absurd. But he hasn't seen it, right? He saw it, but he didn't see it. And by putting this into the mouth of Yama, it's suddenly giving it this weight and this meaning which it never had, right? Remember, it's what I said, that the idea of a mythology is the idea of stories that have a meaning within a community, right? And so this is something which is giving meaning to the ordinary process of life, the things that we see every day that we don't pay attention to, we don't care about, we don't think are important. Suddenly those things have a meaning, right, within a much larger framework. And of course that has a kind of an emotional impact. Yeah? So this is the idea of a story which has a meaning and which will hopefully actually change people's behaviour. Of course, one of the things which is interesting about this is I always think when I look at the Buddha's story about how the king Sujato would try to hide all of these realities from the prince, right? So he sort of keep him in the castle and stop him from going out and so on and so forth and keep him entertained. And I'm thinking that's exactly what our modern culture is built in order to do. Our modern culture is precisely a planet-wide globalization of King Suddhodana's efforts to hide the prince from the reality, right? You look systematically, what do we do, right? Take old people and hide them away, right? And put them into old folks' homes. Don't want to see them. When was the last time you saw someone bent over double, right, down at the local shopping centre or something like that, yeah? Once people get to a certain age, that's it, you shunt it off, right? Old age sickness. How often do we see real sickness anymore? Yeah? As soon as somebody feels a little bit of a twinge or whatever, it's off to the hospital, off to the doctor, and we hide people away. Yeah? And what about dead people? Right? When was the last time you saw a corpse bloated, livid, festering? Yeah? No, you see them all prettily made up with nice clothes on, if you see them at all, right? And usually, a lot of the times, people have closed casket funerals, so you don't see the dead person at all, right? If you do see them, they're done up so nicely that they look just like they're having a sleep. In fact, they probably look better than they have done for many years. I remember one time we had a funeral here, and many years ago, and one of the long-term supporters of the monastery, who used to come here every week and offer dana and so on, he died. we had a funeral. The coffin's just here, and everyone kind of files past to have a look at the coffin. And we file past and have a look at it, and the senior monk who was with me, who shall remain nameless, said, "He looks like John Howard." So we were standing there trying not to laugh, and it was true. He looked exactly like John Howard in death. Not during life, but suddenly he was transformed, and there was the mask of John Howard lying there. Anyway, so we hide all these things, don't we? Yeah. And then all of the kind of the distractions, the Sujato had all the dancing girls and so on to keep him distracted, and of course that's exactly what we do. Yeah, we have all the movies and shows and all of these things to keep us distracted from seeing the reality. Yeah? And that's what we put into these things. Yeah, is just when was the last time? I remember when I was on. You see, as a monk, you're not supposed to sort of watch telly and all of these kinds of things. But I remember many years ago, I was on a plane from Sydney to Perth, and this was I think in the days. This was quite a few years ago, but in the days when they still had the videos on the big screen rather than having the individual ones in your seat. And when the plane was flying in, they were showing all these music videos, right? I wasn't kind of really watching or anything, but you can just see it in the background. And of course, music videos, it's all kind of, it's all people dancing, and everybody's young and beautiful, right? And that's all you ever see. And then it changed, and then there was another one, and it was just a succession of faces, and it was really striking that you saw, after all of these things, that you saw actually old people and not particularly beautiful people, and people who were just ordinary, and people who weren't kind of made up to look special. And it just had these close-ups of people's faces one after the other. And it was so striking how different it was to actually see real human beings in that kind of context. Yeah? And then it come to what must have been the chorus of the song, and it was Nick Cave playing. So I thought, yes, that's Nick Cave. So he's singing about reality. He was one of my favourite singers in the old days. Anyway, but that shows how much efforts we take to continually hide this reality of the human condition. Yeah? So King Yama is the one who is showing that reality. And so, again, think about what this means in a mythological context, right? Usually when a god or something like that appears, they give some kind of divine revelation. I don't know what the gods and things are supposed to talk about, but they're supposed to say, yes, I'm, if you think about the cliche in sort of Western iconography, the clouds are going to open up and God comes forth and light streams out, and it's all kind of heavenly and it's all magical and it's all amazing and stuff. But here God's talking, and it's just very, very ordinary. He's not talking about anything special. He's not talking about anything divine. He's not, I have a revelation for you. This is something you've never heard before. He's pointing to something incredibly ordinary, right? The most ordinary things you can imagine. Yeah? And he just points straight to those things. These are the important things about your life. Huh? So the purpose of that story is to convey a value, right? It's to cause that character in that story, and of course by extension us, to question, how do we live our life? What kinds of things do we value in our lives? Right? This is what it means, and this is why I said that idea that a myth, the purpose of a myth is a story that conveys a sense of meaning, right? And that meaning of values. One of the roles that story does in that way is that story and mythology engages your emotions in a way that simply teaching doesn't. That simply sort of speaking directly doesn't, right? So, the Buddha could sit there and did on many occasions just talk about what's the right thing to do, and good and bad karma and so on, and good acts by body, speech and mind, and bad acts and so on. And we can talk about that, and we can know what that means, and we can understand it. But by putting it in a story like this, when you hear a story, there's a connection or an empathy with that person. And I think we can all empathize with the main character in this story, with the person who's being questioned, right? Yeah? Even though we might like to think we're a bit more aware than that, right? But the reality is that actually we do that every day, probably. Yeah? And we all go around every day and we see these signs, and yet probably we kind of ignore it most of the time. And we don't really think about it. And we don't really change the way that we live our lives. So the story is actually calling us to change how we live our lives. It's not just a piece of entertainment. Okay. So the old age and the sickness and the death, right? And in each case, when you don't reflect on those things, and the person does bad because they don't reflect on it, and then they will experience the result of that karma. And of course, what's emphasized throughout the sutta, that karma of yours was not done by your mother or father, by your brother or sister, friends and companions, relatives, family members, deities, ascetics and Brahmins, right? In other, no excuse. Yeah? It's done by you, and you receive the results of it. Yeah? So that's quite a stern teaching. Yeah? This is very, very basic in the teaching of karma. Karma yoni, karma bandhu, karma patisarano, karma sakomhi. Right? So it's a karma sakomi. I'm the heir of my karma. I'm the owner of my karma. In different religion traditions and different spiritual traditions, there are problems with this, because you have problems with when you have the interaction of the human and the divine. And any theistic religion will struggle with these issues, because basically you have a problem that God was supposed to cause everything and create everything. So if God created everything, didn't he create my life and determine everything I'm doing in my life? So therefore, how come he's punishing me for it, right? And this is a big problem that you have throughout every theistic religion. In the Christian tradition, you have the notion of vicarious atonement, right? So you have original sin and vicarious atonement. So Adam and Eve did something bad, right? I don't know particularly what bad it was that they did. They just had a piece of fruit. I don't quite know what was wrong. But anyway, they were disobedient, I guess. So God kicks them out and punishes everyone for all time because of that, right? This is the doctrine of vicarious atonement. Now, obviously, you're probably meant to read that symbolically or whatever, but still the idea is there somehow that we experience suffering for what somebody else did, which is a bit weird, right? Otherwise, in Islam, if you read the Quran, is quite different. In the Quran, in Christianity is very vague about these questions, right? There's the Bible gives you so many different takes on these things that you can actually read them in many different ways. But the Quran, being a later text, seems that it was written at a time when these things had already been discussed, and it makes a sort of firm statement on them that God did indeed create these things, that he made what's bad and what's good, and he made your suffering. And if you did do a bad thing, it's because God makes you do it, and he will punish you for it. Okay? So God made you do it, and he will punish you for it, and he is kind and benevolent. Right? So that's repeated all the way through the Quran. This is a basic kind of thing there. So at least you may or may not like that as a teaching. At least it's clear what's going on. Right? Whether that's a virtue or not, I'm not sure. From a Buddhist point of view, again, this is another way of tackling that same problem. So here, from a Buddhist point of view, God isn't the one who punishes, God isn't the one who ordains what is right and wrong, and God isn't the one who forces you to do this or to do that, right? None of these things happen. Gods, like us, are subject to the law of karma, right? We're all operating within nature. Gods, in the Western tradition or theistic traditions, gods create nature, right? They create the laws of nature. Whereas in the Indian traditions, especially in Buddhism, gods are operating within the laws of nature just like everybody else. So in performing this role, Yama is simply fulfilling an office, right? He's done his karma in the past, and there he is, and he will be, his role at the moment is to question and so on. We'll see a bit later on that he actually acknowledges that quite explicitly. So there's a completely different relationship with the divine, right, with the heavenly beings and so on, right? So even though superficially the notion of a God, judge of the dead and so on and so forth, looks similar to notions you might find in a theistic religion, right? But the way that it's treated is actually radically different, and it's clearly meant to undermine and to undercut these kind of ideas that these things are done by God. Again, coming back to the thing that King Yama doesn't actually do anything. All he does is invite you to reflect on your own actions. Yeah? But it's your karma which is at work here. Okay. So, can't blame anybody for your karma. Right, where are we going? Sorry, it's a bit hard to find my way around. No. Okay, so, and then up to the third divine messenger. And the wardens of hell drag him and torture him with the fivefold transfixing, right? Driving stakes through his heart and so on and so forth. These descriptions of the sufferings of hell are quite similar to the ones found in the Bala Pandita and Devadutta suttas in the Majjhima Nikaya. In fact, they're pretty much the same passages. I think more details in the Majjhima 130. If that's the kind of thing you're into. So first of all, just remember, okay, that this is like one passage or like 3 suttas among several thousand suttas, right? So it's not as if the Buddha was banging on about this all the time, right? It's something that he mentioned, if it's an authentic passage, which I don't know, but if it is, then he mentioned it, 2 or 3 times in his 45-year career as a teacher. So not necessarily a major theme. How literally, of course we want to know how literally all this is meant to be taken. Again, I don't really know. Interesting thing it says at the end is that because I'm not repeating something that I heard from another ascetic or Brahmin, but rather I'm speaking about a matter that I've actually known, seen and understood for myself. And this is actually a stock phrase that's found in a number of passages in the suttas. And I think it's interesting that it's inserted here. But what the exact significance of it is, I'm not sure, and I'd be hesitant to draw any actual conclusions from it. Obviously, it's meant to be emphatic and meant to make you think that this is something which is directly seen by the Buddha and is meant to be literally taken. But I must admit I'm a little bit skeptical about that. It sounds to me in this context that it more feels a bit forced. It's not kind of demanded by the context. It seems to me that it's more perhaps a sort of subconscious admission of something that's maybe not meant to be taken so literally. I'm not sure. As I said before, there are a lot of Chinese parallels, and you'd want to do a detailed study of those parallels before coming to any conclusions, which I haven't done, I have to admit. So, I can't say too much about that, unfortunately. Okay, so the different kinds of hells, glowing coals, being cooked in a froth of metal, being trapped in an iron cage, burning, all sounds fairly gruesome. Doesn't sound like a place you want to go to. Any questions? No. Well, yes, of course it can be. Yeah. But I don't know. I just find this is such a worn-out metaphor. It's kind of boring. Yes, is hell an absence of love? I don't know. I've lived in life with an absence of love, and it wasn't that bad, Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's certainly not permanent. That's true. Yeah. Exactly, yeah, they last for a long time, yeah. But whether that's also, I mean, that's an interesting thing that there's some suttas where they talk about that. Payasi Sutta in the Digha Nikaya is one, and it's very interesting that the sutta is actually very sophisticated in many ways. And one of the things that they mention is that there's this kind of time dilation problem when you're dealing with other realms. And as far as I know, this is the earliest text of any kind anywhere that actually talks about this, right? The fact that if you're born into a heaven realm, right? So the question goes like this in the Payasi Sutta, right? You have a friend, Prince Payasi is trying to prove whether rebirth exists, okay? He's a skeptic. And so he asks his friend, he had a friend who was a good person who'd done lots of good deeds and so on all his life. He said, look, after you've died, I want you to come back and tell me whether there's another realm, right? And then after he died, then nobody came to see him. So he's like, obviously there's no such thing as rebirth, right? And then the monk who's talking to says, well, yeah, but see, the problem is that, he dies, he gets reborn in the heaven realm, and then he just thinks, oh, look, wow, this is amazing, this is a great heaven. I might just have a bit of a look around and enjoy myself for a little while before I go and see my friend. And by the time he's looked around for a few hours, 1,000,000 years has gone past on Earth, and then you're dead and gone. So, but it is interesting, that whole concept that time moves in different speeds in different realms and so on. It's quite a sophisticated way of thinking about these things, and so. Look, what these different dimensions are and so on, I do not know. And I have to admit, we discussed this. So I had a Skype discussion with Bhikkhu Bodhi, and Ajahn Brahmali and myself had a discussion with Bhikkhu Bodhi a few weeks ago. And we talked about some of these very issues. And it's one thing where we have to admit that certainly in the Buddhist tradition, these things are generally taken quite literally, okay? So if you talk to someone from traditional Buddhist background and you say, where is hell? They'll say, it's down there. Simple. Right? Where is heaven? It's in the sky. Yeah. And so there's no doubt that that's the kind of the mainstream way of looking at it. How that's to be reconciled with modern scientific understanding, I don't really know. It's something I'd like to see more interest put into and more work put into looking at. It is, yeah, it's pretty bad, yeah. Well, I don't think the Buddha's advocating that someone should be tortured like that. Yeah, it's just pointing to cause and effect, yeah, and not saying this is how it should be. And the whole tone of it is very neutral. Again, another great difference from the Buddhist texts. If you think about how these things are handled in Western and theistic tones, it's very much like, you are a sinner and you deserve it, yeah? Right? So here, the Yama is supposed to be the judge of the dead, but he's not judgmental at all, is he? He's asking him, what is it you did? And say, well, you did a bad thing. You're going to see the results of it, that's all. It's just cause and effect. Yeah? So that whole tone of sort of self-righteousness and so on isn't there at all. It is, definitely, yeah. 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 Yes. Right. Okay. Well, there's two things there. Yes, on the one hand, yes, obviously that is using fear in a way similar to how it is in the Western religions. Again, remembering a kind of a matter of proportion. Okay, so it's not like this is it's not like every sutta. You've read a lot of suttas by now, and you know what I'm saying is absolutely true. That certainly you don't find fear in lots of suttas, right? It's very, very rare. So there's a big difference. I mean, fear is a genuine emotion, and it does actually motivate people, right? And people use it all the time. I think to sort of use it cynically and to overuse it and so on is not very healthy. But on the other hand, a little bit of fear occasionally, maybe not such a bad thing. So that's one thing, is a question of fear. But I would agree, generally speaking, fear isn't a skillful way to motivate people. So that was one thing you mentioned. And the second one was the fear and whether you should just do good because it's good. Yeah, well, kind of, but who are you talking to, right? I mean, yes, of course, it's better to do it that way, right? But some people aren't going to do good just because it's good, yeah? And some people maybe need a bit more stirring up. So this particular sutta is not giving us a context, but typically what we see in some other places where the Buddha gives a very stern discourse, that there was a background to it, right? That maybe there were some monks who were misbehaving or something like that, and then he gives a very stern discourse because actually he needs to shake these people up. Yeah. So this again is something that we're kind of lacking in this case because we don't have a background story, but yes, that's I think usually the way with the Buddha's teachings, that he didn't go around saying these very extreme things, but occasionally, in extreme cases like, say, the case of Devadatta or something like that, then he'd get a bit more worked up. Yeah, John. Mm. Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what you're doing through, karma. Karma is creating the worlds that you live in. Yeah. Mm. Right. Yep. Yeah. So karma is like gravity. You fall over and it hurts, right? And gravity is not condemning you. It's just that's how it works. You trip over, you fall down, and it hurts. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. I think that's very true, yeah. I think that there are some people who would just ignore it anyway. But I mean, it's a complex question. Why do people do bad things? But generally speaking, I think that ignorance is a big part of it. We're kind of veiled from the consequences of what we do. Yeah, very much so. Veronica's laughing, yeah? To what degree do you have to do that? Yeah, so Veronica comes from a Chinese background where filial piety is very, very important. To what degree? Yeah. Well, obviously you should treat your parents with respect, but sometimes parents don't act very respectfully to their children. So, you just have to do your best and be reasonable about it, yeah? So you don't, even if your parents are not behaving in a good way, if they're being harassing or punishing or abusive or something like that, but you don't try to hurt them as a result of that, so sometimes you might want to protect yourself, or you might want to get your distance or something like that, but not to sort of try to get revenge or try to get your money away from them, or all the kind of things that children sometimes do to hurt their parents. Yeah. Sorry. No. You can still sort of maintain a sense of respect and so on, but at the same time just say, leave me alone. Yeah. And sometimes you just have to do that. Remember, these things they're meant as general teachings. So in specific cases, then we have to have a look at how to deal with those. Yeah. Well, in the human realm, maybe, but in that realm, remember what karma is. Karma is making ethical choices, okay? So choices to either do good or to do harm. So what ethical choices are you making in that particular circumstance, right? Or here I am floating in the pot of molten copper, come to the surface and getting killed. I think I'll go and save a bunny. No, you can't do anything. What can you do? Yeah, so you're not making any moral choices. And so in that way it's quite different from the human realm. Can do, yeah. Mentally on some level you can, right? But so yes, you could. It's not that you're entirely separated from it, but still it's quite different. You're not really making karma in that same kind of way. Yeah. Yeah, not in the same level. But this certainly is a normal way that karma is talked about in other realms, in the heaven realms as well. And let's talk about the punyakaya, the ending of the merit or the good karma that you've made. Yeah. So that's. Yeah. Absolutely. But it'll still keep on going, yeah. Yeah. Hence, the ending of the sutta, which we get to once, because past King Yama thought, those in the world who do evil deeds are punished with such diverse tortures, oh, that I might attain the human state. So the King Yama wants to be a human. And the reason for that, and this question came up some time ago, we're talking about, whether people can practice the Dhamma in the Deva realms. And generally speaking, it's held in Buddhism that it's possible in the different realms to practice Dhamma, but the human realm is much better for practicing the Dhamma. So even Yama, maybe Yama was just too busy having to judge people all the time, right? Everyone's dying and having to come up to him. I don't know. He would have had some serious time management problems dealing with all these people. So anyway, it's always felt that the human realm is the best place for practicing Dhamma. That a Tathagata, Arahant, perfectly enlightened Buddha might arise in the world, that I might attend on the Buddha, that the Buddha might teach me the Dhamma, and that I might understand his Dhamma. Okay, so King Yama, again, this is a kind of way of mythologizing that and getting people to appreciate the good circumstances that they find themselves in. Yeah, and again, notice the difference between the approach here and the approach in theistic religions. It's always God's role is to save you, right? I'm nothing, right? I'm a sinner. I can only get by if God comes and saves me. Whereas here, God is actually envying you, right? You're the one who's got the power. You're the one who can make the change. God wishes that he could be you so he could do what you've got. Yeah. I mentioned before this passage about not repeating something you've heard from somewhere else and saying that's, I'm not sure, it feels a little bit, because it comes after this particular passage where the Buddha's then referring to this Yama's thoughts in the past, right? So I'm not sure whether that's meant to refer just to that passage. So when he says he's not repeating something, is he just referring to the previous passage about King Yama, or is he referring to the whole sutta? I'm not entirely sure, so it seems to be a bit unclear. And then finally a couple of verses. This particular text is from the Aguttara Nikaya, and this is extremely characteristic of the Aguttara in particular, is that it will have a prose section, and then it will summarize the prose section with some verses. Yeah, so I've read them before, so I won't read them again. Yeah, okay. So this is the Devaduta Sutta. So in a way, this is it's a myth. I think it should be treated as a myth, and like any good myth, it conveys a set of values in a way that will create an identity. So you identify with the protagonist of the myth, You live through them in a sense. But also, like any good myth, it's subversive, okay? This is another thing which is really important about mythology and which is essential to any kind of good myth. I mentioned before about Luke Skywalker, right? The mythology of Luke Skywalker in Star Wars, right? There was an interview with Joseph Campbell talking about this, and he said the most important moment in Star Wars was when Luke Skywalker pushed the viewfinder thingy to one side, right? You remember that? They're attacking the Death Star, and he's go down, and they've got this like, computer interface. They can see the thing, and that's supposed to help them to find their target. And so they're going down, and this voice of Obi-Wan comes and says, "Trust the Force, Luke," or something like that. And then he pushes it to one side, right? And then does it. So that's the crucial moment in the myth, right? Because that's the moment that he's going against convention. He's doing what, this is this incredibly important moment, right? This is a whole future of humanity hangs on whether this attack is going to be successful, yeah? And he's a rookie pilot. He's not experienced or anything like that. And suddenly he just decides to trust his own intuition, right? Rather than the voice of convention, right? Which is represented by the computer display and that kind of thing. So come back to his own intuitive understanding, yeah? And this is one of those important things about myth. They have to subvert. They operate within a system, within a culture and so on, but they also subvert the values of that culture at the same time. Yeah, very, very important. Yeah, so that this myth of Yama, in a sense, the Buddha's adopting these ideas that are current in Indian culture, but he's at the same time he's subverting them. Right, he's not just repeating it mindlessly, but he's taking very important aspects of this and turning it completely upside down, and in a way that is actually very similar to that moment in Star Wars. Right, so it's not, morality is not like just a list of rules to follow or something like that, but morality is something that arises when an intelligent and mature person reflects on their own actions and understands what is the meaning and consequence of those actions for themselves. Yeah? That is a very subversive thing to be taught in a religious text of 2,500 years ago, let alone 2,500 years. Crikey. It's still subversive today. When I was in Sydney a couple of years ago, we had this, in Sydney, in the education system in primary schools in New South Wales, the system is that the primary school kids learn what they go to a scripture class, and it's called SRE, Special Religious Education. And what that means is that the scripture class is taught by people from volunteers usually, or paid chaplains or whatever, no, not chaplains, but paid people, scripture teachers from those religious bodies, okay? So the Christians will send somebody to go and teach the Christian kids, the Buddhists will send somebody to go and teach the Buddhist kids, except we don't have anybody to send them, so they don't usually get anybody, but if we do have someone, we send them to help the Buddhist kids and so on. And if you don't go to any of those scripture classes, you go to non-scripture class, okay? So non-scripture class depends on what school you're at, but often it just means you goof around for an hour. But if you've got somebody good, then they might read you some stories or give you something to do or whatever. So it depends, but basically you don't do very much. So you're effectively wasting an hour a week. So this ethics group in Sydney, the St. James Ethics something group, it's called St. James, but it's not a Christian group, it just happens to be in a building called St. James. They proposed an ethics course for primary school kids, right, that would actually teach them how to work out the answer to ethics problems for themselves, right? Actually, it's a brilliant idea, and somewhat similar to the thing that Yama's doing here, and they would introduce problems. They would ask the kids, is graffiti right or wrong? And maybe give them a bit of framework and get them a bit of discussion and so on, and let them find the answer. Seems like a pretty good idea to me, right? But you know who was really strongly opposed to that? The Catholics and the Anglicans, right? They hated it, yeah? And they tried to get this struck down and opposed it every step of the way, to the extent that in the New South Wales Parliament, one of the great friends of I guess, tolerance and openness in Australian politics, the Reverend Fred Nile was in New South Wales Parliament and said on the day that this legislation was being introduced that all the religions oppose it, including the Jews and the Buddhists and the Hindus and so on. They all oppose this idea, right? Of course, we reacted instantly and furiously, saying that we we actually supported it completely from the Buddhists, and the Hindus did, and the Jews did. But by that time, the damage was done because it had already been voted on. Yeah? This is the way that politics works in these things. So this is still a very subversive idea. From a Buddhist point of view, that's how we should be understanding ethics, right? Learn to reflect on it, understand and know it for yourself. And that's what the Buddha did when dealing with kids, right? And a wonderful sutta where the kids are playing with the crab and hurting it, and the Buddha asks the kids, do you think that crab feels pain? Yes. Well, do you feel pain? Yeah, we feel pain. Well, do you like it when people hurt you? Would you like it if people were doing that? And they said, no, we wouldn't like it. And he said, well, therefore, do you think that you should really be doing that? And they said, no, we shouldn't. And so that's the way that the Buddha taught ethics to children. Yeah, not by saying, bad boy, don't do that or I'll hit you, right? Yeah? But by assuming that they know what's right and wrong, okay? But you have to be drawn out. We have to get people to reflect on it. Yeah? So this is what Yama's doing. Yama here, we're putting that same process in a mythological context. And Yama as God, his role is not to say, do this, don't do that, this is right, this is wrong, you're going to be punished, you're a bad person, you're a good person. None of that. His job is to encourage you to reflect on your life, to reflect on the choices you've made, and to reflect on your values, and to ask you as an intelligent and mature person, the phrase that it uses in the suttas, you're an intelligent, mature person, to get you to take responsibility for your own actions. Yeah? And that is very subversive, and a very subversive way of framing that within that context of the judge of the dead. Right? Even the judge of the dead isn't actually going to judge you. You have to figure it out for yourself. So, Peter.
I have a problem with this translation.
Yep.
Yes, because someone engages in misconduct, like body, speech, and mind. Like, I don't know what the Pali is, but like misconduct, it's sort of, it's such a soft word.
Right.
To get these kind of fruits, someone would have to do serious harm by body, speech, and mind. So like, if I'm like a chef, like just like cooking prawns all the time, just chuck them in there, like, and potentially someone sort of like, wants the chef, like,
You should wash your hands or put your head in a net or something. Yeah, no, I think that's a fair enough point. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
sort of like, surely, like, if I'm killing animals, like, why shouldn't I be reborn as an animal? Big deal.
Yeah. So look, fair enough. I agree with you that there's a difference between, when we use the word misconduct, we often mean kind of very minor things. But yeah, this is obviously talking about something that's quite serious. Yeah. Sorry, was there another question? No. Sorry. Okay, any more questions? No? We'll wrap up. And just so that you know, some of you may have come, or some of you did come a couple of years ago, we did with Ajahn Brahmali the Early Buddhism course. We're planning a similar course for next year, starting in January, and this one will be on karma and rebirth in early Buddhism. Okay, so discussing some of the things we talked about this afternoon and many others, and it promises to be a very interesting course. We're going to be doing some things differently and some things the same, and we will have more details on that course published on the BSWA website soon. Okay, so we're just in the last stages of planning the course and figuring out the readings and things like that. So hopefully we'll see you for next year. That'll be on mostly the fourth Sunday of the month from January for a 6-month period. Okay, so let's finish by paying respects to the Triple Gem.